Welcome back once again to my series about the last games released during a console's official lifespan. This time we're going to take a look at the final batch of games released for the Nintendo 64. When thinking about the N64, I think about games being made from the mid to late 90s, but believe it or not, they were making games up until 2002. It was post Y2K and people were moving on to the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube. I'll be covering games released in North America since that's where I grew up, but maybe someday I'll do a video about all the last games from other regions. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's kick things off with Dr. Mario. It was released on April 9th, 2001 in North America. It's the follow-up to the original Dr. Mario games that were released on the NES and Game Boy back in 1990. So, like the original, it's a falling block puzzle game where instead of blocks, like in Tetris, you're using pills to get rid of viruses. Nintendo Power describes the game as a cross between Tetris and Pokemon Puzzle League, which totally makes sense. They go on to say that the various colored viruses infect your playing field, and you have to get 4 colors in a row to get rid of them. The N64 version is a more enhanced version of the game that features a number of different modes like Classic Mode, Story Mode, and Versus Mode. But the main takeaway is that you can play it with up to 4 players now. Classic Mode is if you want single-player, original-style Dr. Mario gameplay. In Story Mode, you can be either Mario or Wario. You're trying to crack the case of the missing Mega Vitamins, and you meet 12 different characters along the way. There's a lot of cute cutscenes in between stages that introduce the character you'll be going up against in the actual stages. I personally liked the little dancing spider best. There's also Flash Mode, where you clear levels by destroying the flashing viruses first, which can get pretty nuts. Sometimes the virus that's flashing is located on the very bottom, so that can make things pretty stressful. This was even tough on easy, I gotta admit. But it's cool that you can choose from a ton of different characters to play as. In Marathon Mode, you start out with a lot more viruses than usual, and if you're not super great at this game, more viruses will come up from the bottom and completely destroy you. There's also Versus Mode, where one player can compete against CPUs or other players, as well as Score Attack Mode, where you try to wipe out as many viruses as possible in a limited amount of time. So yeah, there are a lot of different ways to play this game. Overall, it's a fun newer take on Dr. Mario, and you gotta check it out if you haven't already, and if you're into puzzle games like this. As the final Mario Party game for the Nintendo 64, Mario Party 3 was released on May 7th, 2001. The game had 71 new minigames, and of course featured Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach, Donkey Kong, and Yoshi as playable characters. But they also introduced Waluigi and Daisy for the first time to play as. You can't play as Waluigi or Daisy in Story Mode though. And speaking of modes, the game has 3 modes. The Battle Royale mode is the classic Mario Party way to play, while Story Mode is made for a single player experience where you go through every board in the game. But it's shorter than the Battle Royale mode. You gotta defeat the computer players and earn stamps from completing boards that go towards earning the Millennium Star. In the game's storyline, the Millennium Star is the main focus because if you get him, you'll rule the world of Mario Party. There's also a duel mode, which is great for 2 players who don't want to wait around for the computer players to take their turns. You just go head to head with the other player, and I like that because I can sometimes get a little impatient with Mario Party. I couldn't help but notice that some of the game definitely has a Paper Mario look to it, which came out the year prior. Nintendo was really into that art style back then, I guess. In the 144th issue of Nintendo Power, there's a multi-page spread on the game that shows details of every board and minigame, which is pretty cool. One of the first things I noticed was the Christina Aguilera reference in the top right-hand corner. I'm a genie in a bottle, baby! That is very 2001. Another thing that makes this game feel very 2001 is the little cell phone item called a cellular shopper. You can use this to call Toad if you're too far away from a shop and need to buy an item quickly. It's basically a Nokia phone with a mushroom on top. I'll also point out a game called Water World, being a play on the title of the movie Waterworld, which kids probably wouldn't get today. Nintendo Power boasts that Mario Party pioneered the board game genre for video games. Well, there was Monopoly on NES before this, and plenty of computer games, so what do you think about that statement? Instead of Toad showing you around the board, you have this little dice guy named Tumble. He's cute, but I gotta admit, I miss Toad. If you want to practice the mini games in this one, you hit R and then hit start on the controller. This can be annoying because sometimes I accidentally hit start first, so it just throws me into the game without practicing. Anyway, the Mario Party games are great and fun to play with friends. Each game in the series brings its own mini-games and variation on the concept to keep things interesting. It was always fun to see what new stages they would make with each new release. Which is your favorite Mario Party game in the series? We have now entered the sports section of the video, and we have to mention Madden NFL 2002 that was released on September 13th, 2001. Now, I don't know a thing about football, but luckily I found this spread about the game in Nintendo Power, so let's take a look. The magazine called Madden NFL 2002 the best Madden football game yet, and I gotta say that the graphics do look really good for an N64 game. They go on to say the fans of the series will recognize the familiar format and controls of the other hit games in Madden 2002. Players will be pleased with the game's added depth, its realistic computer AI, and loads of different hitting animations, which add a greater sense of realism to a series of games that is best known for its easy-to-master play control. Nintendo Power also says that the coolest new feature of this game was the classic Madden mode, which recreates the original game for the Super Nintendo. Next up, we have NFL Blitz 2001. Yes, another football game that I don't really have anything to comment on, but I am interested in seeing what our old pal Nintendo Power has to say about it. In Volume 136, they gave the game an overall rating of 7.9. How specific. I wonder what it kept it from being a solid 8. Anyway, they say that the game's graphics are larger than life rather than true to life, and I totally see what they mean. When I was capturing footage for this video, I couldn't help but notice the insanely over-the-top buffness of the players. I also noticed the cheerleader transition screen in the demo, which I found amusing. They go on to say that Blitz is all about instant gratification, so the action hits hard and fast, and that it's not for people who like more realistic football games like Madden. The Powerpuff Girls were everywhere in the late 90s. I remember there being a ton of merchandise, and I even remember going to a Powerpuff Girls themed birthday party. So, because the series was so well loved, you would think they'd get a decent video game, right? Since they're superheroes who beat the crap out of villains, a fighting game should make sense. Well, not necessarily. Unfortunately, their game, the Powerpuff Girls Chemical Extraction, is one of the worst Nintendo 64 games that I've played in recent memory. Besides being able to play as Blossom, Bubbles, or Buttercup, you can also play as Mojo Jojo, Fuzzy Lumpkins, Him, Princess, Sedusa, Ace, and Big Billy. The range of playable characters is about the only positive thing I can say about this game. Basically, your goal is to pick up and throw furniture and other items at the enemy while also looking for a secret bottle of Chemical X. You start out with the bottle and so does your enemy, but there is also a third bottle hiding somewhere in the level. To steal a bottle from an enemy, you throw an object at them. If you can obtain all 3 bottles, you then can get a special attack, like Laser Vision, which does a decent amount of damage and was usually how I was able to win a round. But this is a lot easier said than done. The second the level starts, you better be ready because enemies will be on top of you instantly. They give you no time to get a hang of the controls or get a chance to figure out what you're doing. And because the enemy gets on top of you so fast, it leaves you with no room to pick up items to throw unless you are super fast. You have to do this little jump kick attack in order to get out of the way of enemies quickly enough before they start pummeling you. You do this by pressing the Z button and then attack. You can also jump and kick separately, but that doesn't really do too much at all. In order to pick things up, you hit down on the C buttons and then hit B to throw things. These controls are really bad, and you need to play it to grasp just how bad it is. If you get hit even once by an enemy, which you probably will, they will just keep hitting you. It's insanely hard to attack back or get out of the situation if you get hit. So basically, you don't even want to get hit once because then you'll get destroyed or severely injured. Like this guy, for instance. He just keeps kicking you and you can't even play. And it kept happening. You get pinned against an object and then the enemy relentlessly attacks you. The camera angles totally suck. Objects constantly get in the way and you can't see what you're doing. Maybe if they made the view more overhead it would have helped, but even then, the game would still suck, so why bother? I couldn't find much information about this game online. I couldn't even find scans of the manual, which would have been nice to find out the controls. Maybe more people played the PlayStation version. The game was actually based off the engine of Tom and Jerry Fists of Fury, which is a lot better. It's still not amazing, but at least the controls are decent and the graphics look a lot better. When I tried it out, I wasn't continuously being attacked. Jerry goes off and does his own thing for a minute, so you have a chance to get your bearings. Nintendo Power actually gave the game a 1.5-star rating, with the review headline being, "The Powerpuff Girls give fighting games a black eye." This was pretty funny since they are usually pretty lenient when it comes to reviews. It's a shame that the game wasn't at least decent, because back then people would have loved a fun Powerpuff Girls fighting game. Next up, we have Razer Freestyle Scooter. I still remember the first time I ever saw a Razer scooter. My friend got one and my middle school mind was blown. I begged my parents for it and I ended up getting one with orange wheels and orange handlebars. That thing was very loved. So because it was such a big deal back then, I guess it only makes sense that there would have been a video game. In November of 2001, Razer Freestyle Scooter was released for the Nintendo 64 as a Blockbuster exclusive. This seems appropriate since this is one of those games that isn't bad, but after playing it for a few days, you'd most likely be ready to move on to something else, which makes it good for renting. I like that the guy on the front is wearing a helmet. I can understand why they would do this, to set a good example or whatever, but me and my friends never wore any protective gear with these things. We just skinned our knees and went on with our lives. Luckily, the worst thing that would happen would be spinning the scooter around and having it slam right into my shins. As you can probably tell, this game was totally influenced by Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Nintendo Power called it a junior version of Pro Skater, which I thought was a great way to sum it up. They go on to say in this review, where they give the game 3 stars by the way, that it plays suspiciously like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater with handlebars, but why mess with such a successful formula? I agree that it being a Pro Skater clone isn't really a bad thing. Because what else would you want it to be? Uniracers on Super Nintendo? But unlike Tony Hawk, instead of a soundtrack featuring popular bands, it features generic pop punk and alt rock. I can't really expect a Blockbuster exclusive Razer scooter game to get bands like the Ramones or AFI, so this didn't bother me. They did about as well as they could. You can choose between playing as either Chad or Amy, but can later unlock other characters to choose from. You can also pick out what color scooter you want, which we all know was a very important choice growing up. Mine was orange, so I went with that for the game as well. It takes place in a crazy scooter park full of railings and ramps, so you can do all sorts of tricks. I'm really bad at games like this, so I did what I could, which was not much. However, from what I could tell, the game controlled just fine and it was better than I thought it would be. In volume 150 of Nintendo Power, they actually had a whole spread on the game, which even includes a list of tricks you can pull off. I wish I knew this when recording the footage. Anyway, I was at least able to grind on some railings and do a little hand plant maneuver. I mostly was going up and down ramps and attempting to do little spinny jumps. Apparently, if you keep doing the same trick over and over, you start receiving fewer points each time you do the move. This encourages you to try and do other tricks, but since this was a rental, I imagine this being a bit tricky to figure out since I doubt the manual stayed with the game. I guess in some instances you'd get the manual when renting if it didn't get lost from the previous renter. Or if your video store even offered that. I can't remember if Blockbuster did that, it's been so long. But then again, maybe you were one of the kids who rented the game after seeing this issue of Nintendo Power, so you were good to go. And lastly, we have Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, which was released on August 20th, 2002. This was the final release for the Nintendo 64. By this point, many people were onto systems like the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. It's hard for me to think back to this time period and imagine a new N64 game coming out, but it happened. This was a launch title for the GameCube, so most people were playing this game either on that or the PS2. The situation is kind of like how Twilight Princess was really made for the Wii, but still got a release on the GameCube near the end of that system's lifespan. The main part of Tony Hawk 3 is the career mode. There are all kinds of goals to complete on each level, collecting letters to spell out skate, getting a high score, finding tapes, etc. If you are good enough to complete all the career mode goals, you get to unlock Wolverine from X-Men, which is a pretty great reward. The N64 version also has a custom skate park creation mode where you can make your own levels. This gives the game a lot of replayability. Games that include map editors are cool, like Excitebike or Mario Maker. I never played Tony Hawk games growing up, but I do have a lot of friends that got into punk rock because of these games, so that's pretty cool. The soundtracks are a major component to the success of these games, I think. Having a good soundtrack was the perfect cherry on top of good gameplay and really set the tone for the franchise. But since this was on the N64, a lot of the songs got trimmed down so it wasn't as awesome as it would have been on the PS2 or GameCube. For example, the Ramones' Blitzkrieg Bop is included, but it's compressed way down to fit. maybe it would be a better idea to just turn down the volume entirely and put your own music on. You can turn the music off and keep the sound effects going, so that way you can listen to whatever you want without limitations. But when trying this, it kind of sounded like the music was trying to play anyway. It was really odd, so I don't know, maybe that really isn't an option. Anyway, I'm not good at the Tony Hawk games, but I can tell it's a good game for people who are into this type of thing. At least the Nintendo 64's library ended on a high note. So there you have it, the last games to be officially released for the Nintendo 64 in North America. What console would you like to see me cover next? Let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!